The beginning of the end, or perhaps the end of the beginning, started with the violent symphony of a car crash. I was the passenger, a ghost in my own life even then. We were on the familiar stretch of Route 9, heading west out of Boston, the late afternoon sun slanting through the grimy windshield. My brother, Liam, was behind the wheel. Me in the front seat, a fortress of solitude built around the earbuds piping music into my skull. I was half listening to him drone on about some prestigious summer internship at a finance firm, another gilded step on the golden path our mother had paved for him since birth. Then came the discordant notes, the shriek of tortured rubber on asphalt, the violent, sickening lurch as Liam wrenched the wheel. The world became a kaleidoscope of chaos. I remember the percussive crunch of the front end collapsing, a sound so loud and final it felt like the world was tearing in half. There was a spray of warmth across my face that I registered, with a strange detachment, as my own blood. There was pain, a sudden, all-consuming fire in my side. There was the crystalline explosion of the passenger side window, a shower of glittering, deadly confetti. And then, mercifully, there was blackness. When I surfaced, it wasn't to the gentle shores of my own bed or the tearful relief of my parents. It was to the harsh, unforgiving glare of fluorescent lights overhead, humming a flat, monotonous tune. The air was thick with the sterile, chemical smell of antiseptic, a scent that scoured the inside of my nostrils. My arms were anchors, tethered to chrome poles by a web of IV tubes. A deep, ragged ache pulsed from my torso, a feeling so profound it felt as though I had been cleaved open and crudely stitched back together. I blinked, my eyelashes heavy and sticky. The world swam into a blurry, bleached-out focus. My mouth was a desert, my tongue a thick, useless slab of leather. I tried to form a word, a question, anything, but all that escaped was a low, animal groan, the sound of a machine struggling to start. A nurse, her face a mask of professional calm, noticed the flicker of life. Her movements were swift and efficient. She checked a monitor, adjusted a drip, and then spoke into a phone clipped to her scrubs. A few minutes later, the door slid open and my parents walked in. They did not rush to my bedside. There was no panic in their eyes, no flood of relief that their daughter had clawed her way back from the brink. They looked tired, but it was the tired of a long commute, of a tedious obligation. It was the exhaustion of inconvenience. "She's awake," my mother said. Her words were directed at the doctor who followed them in, crisp and cold as the starched white of his coat. She didn't look at me. She didn't reach for my hand. My father stood a pace behind her, his gaze fixed on a point on the wall somewhere above my head, his jaw tight. The doctor, a man with kind lines around his eyes, offered me a small, relieved smile. "You've been through a major ordeal," he said, his voice gentle. "We were in a severe accident. You lost a kidney, but you're stable now. The surgery was a success. We saved you." I tried to ask about Liam. The name was a fire in my throat. The nurse, bless her, seemed to understand. She spooned tiny ice chips into my mouth, the cold a temporary balm. When I could finally rasp out his name, it was my mother who answered, her tone flat, bored, as if discussing the weather. "He's fine." He walked away with a few scratches. "You, on the other hand, will be enjoying our hospitality for a while." She didn't seem heartbroken that her daughter had been torn apart while her son was unscathed. She seemed annoyed at the asymmetry of it all, at the disruption to her well-ordered life. The days that followed were a blur of pain, medication, and a profound, chilling loneliness. I was a prisoner in that hospital bed, my body a roadmap of sutures and bruises, my mind struggling to piece together the shattered fragments of my reality. Liam never visited. Not once. My parents' visits were brief, perfunctory, executed with the grim efficiency of a legal requirement. They would sign a form, have a clipped conversation with a doctor in the hallway, and leave. I tried to rationalize their behavior. It was shock, I told myself. It was guilt. Liam must feel so terrible that he couldn't bear to see me. My parents didn't know how to handle the trauma. I clung to these flimsy explanations like a life raft because the alternative was too monstrous to contemplate. Until the night I woke up and the flimsy raft splintered, plunging me into the freezing, dark water of the truth. It was late, sometime in that deep, silent abyss between midnight and dawn. The pain in my side was a sharp, insistent thing that made sleep impossible. The room was cold, the thin hospital blanket doing little to ward off the chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. I was drifting in a hazy state, not quite asleep but not fully awake, when I heard voices. They were low, conspiratorial whispers from the hallway, just outside my partially open door. I was hooked to a symphony of beeping machines, my body weak and rebellious, but my hearing was sharp. I recognized the voices instantly. My mother, my father, and the doctor, the one with the kind eyes. So you're saying if we were to harvest her other kidney, that was my mother's voice, calm and transactional, as if she were discussing a stock option. The doctor's reply was firm, laced with disbelief. Mrs. Albright, she wouldn't survive that. She's already lost one kidney in the trauma. Removing the second would mean a lifetime of dialysis, assuming she even made it off the table. It would effectively be a death sentence. But Liam needs it, my dad interrupted, his voice tight with a desperate urgency I had never heard him use in relation to me. He's the one with the future, a future at Princeton. He's our legacy. She's just a girl. She doodles in notebooks. She doesn't even know what she wants to do with her life. She'll never be able to have children, not really. The doctors said the trauma was too severe. She can't play sports. She's already limited, my mother added, her tone as flat and lifeless as an EKG readout. This would be a sacrifice. It would mean something. Her life would finally have a purpose. A heavy silence hung in the air. I could almost feel the doctor's shock radiating through the wall. You are talking about murdering your own daughter for an organ, he said, his voice dangerously low. She'd be doing something good for the family. For once, my mom snapped, her voice cracking with a sudden, vicious anger. The air left my lungs in a silent whoosh. I couldn't breathe. My chest was a vacuum. The beeping of the heart monitor next to my bed seemed to grow louder, a frantic, panicked rhythm that mirrored the frantic, panicked drumming in my ears. My own parents. My mother and my father were standing in a hospital hallway, calmly and rationally plotting my demise, packaging it as a noble sacrifice. They were offering me up piece by piece to salvage the perfect, unblemished future of their golden boy. My stomach churned, a nauseous cocktail of terror and betrayal. I pulled the thin sheet up over my head, creating a pathetic, flimsy tent. I willed myself to be still, to be invisible. I wanted to scream, a primal, raw sound of agony. I wanted to rip the IVs from my arms, sever the ties that bound me to this place, and run until my lungs burned and my legs gave out. But I couldn't even lift my arm without a searing bolt of pain. Tears, hot and silent, streamed from my eyes, soaking into the starchy pillowcase. It wasn't a new revelation, not really. I had always known they loved Liam more. He was the athlete, the scholar, the one whose trophies lined the mantelpiece. I was the quiet one, the artistic one, the afterthought. I was the shadow that proved how brightly he shone. But I had never, not in my wildest, most insecure nightmares, imagined this. I never imagined they would be willing to extinguish my life just to ensure his continued to burn bright. They left. Their footsteps faded down the hall. I lay there in the dark, the sound of their whispered words echoing in the cavern of my mind. I waited until the first gray light of dawn crept through the window, staining the white walls with the color of ash. And in that cold, sterile room, a decision crystallized within me, hard and clear as a diamond. I would get out. I would live. But I would not just survive. I would build a life so magnificent, so undeniable that it would stand as a monument to their betrayal. I would make sure they never, ever forgot what they tried to do to me. The next morning, when a new nurse came in to check my vitals, I kept my face placid. I waited until she was done, until she was about to leave. "Nurse," I started, my voice a dry, reedy whisper. She turned back, her smile kind. "Yes, sweetie, I feel." "Unsafe," I said, carefully choosing my words. "Could I please speak to a hospital social worker?" I didn't elaborate. I didn't need to. Something in my voice, a tremor of cold, hard fear, must have communicated the gravity. Her smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of deep concern. She nodded, her eyes holding mine for a long moment. "Of course," she said, "right away." That afternoon, I was sitting propped up against a mountain of pillows, my body screaming in protest, facing a woman with a kind, weary face and the softest voice I had ever heard. Her name was Judith, and she sat in the uncomfortable visitor's chair with a notepad on her lap, but she didn't write anything down at first. She just listened. I told her everything. The words came out in a low, flat monotone. The numbness that had settled over me was a shield, a mercy. I couldn't afford to cry. Crying was a luxury for people who felt safe. I was in a war for my own survival. "My parents," I said, my gaze fixed on my bandaged hands. "They asked a doctor to take my remaining kidney for my brother. They said my life wasn't worth as much as his." Judith blinked once, a slow, deliberate motion. Then she quietly closed her notepad, placing it on the small table beside her. That single, decisive action told me everything I needed to know. She believed me. That was all it took. That day, the world tilted on its axis. Judith moved with the quiet, unstoppable force of a glacier. An ethics complaint was formally filed with the hospital administration. A protective order was placed on my room, a legal barrier my parents could not cross. A security guard was posted outside my door. My medical decisions, my very body, were no longer accessible to them. The hospital's own security protocols, which included ambient audio recordings in the hallways outside patient rooms for liability purposes, had captured enough of the conversation to corroborate my story. It was a grainy, distorted recording, but the words were unmistakable. I had never felt so terrified, and yet in the same breath, so profoundly, intoxicatingly free. When my parents found out they had been legally barred from their own daughter, they raged. They stormed into the surgical wing's waiting room, my mother's voice a shrill instrument of fury demanding access. Security escorted them out. I watched from my window as my mother, her face a contorted mask of indignation, pointed a trembling finger at the nurse's station, her screams muffled by the thick glass. "She's brainwashing our daughter. That girl belongs to us." But I didn't belong to them anymore. Not after what they had planned in the dark. The story spread like a quiet contagion among the hospital staff. They called me the kidney girl. It was a label I hated, but it was also my shield. Nurses would come into my room with tears in their eyes. The kind doctor who had refused my parents came to see me one afternoon. He sat by my bed, placed a warm hand on mine, and said, "You deserve to live, and you deserve to do it on your own terms. We're all going to make sure of that." After 3 long weeks, I was discharged. Not to the quiet, leafy street in Brookline where I grew up, but to a foster home in Dorchester. It wasn't glamorous. The apartment was small, the mattress was thin, and the air always smelled faintly of curry and bleach. But it was safe. And for the first time in my life, I understood that safe was everything. I was just a few months shy of my 18th birthday. With Judith's help and a judge's order, I was granted temporary legal emancipation. They couldn't touch me. Not legally, not physically. I finished my high school diploma online, my fingers flying across the keyboard of a used laptop while my body slowly, painfully knitted itself back together. I got a job working the late shift at a cavernous old bookstore near Kenmore Square, the scent of aging paper and coffee my new sanctuary. I saved every single penny. I refused financial aid for college, even when social services offered it. I didn't want anything that came with a string attached, no matter how benevolent. I wanted full, absolute control. The day I turned 18, I walked into the Suffolk County Courthouse and legally changed my name. I shed the name Albright like a snake sheds its skin. I took my great-grandmother's maiden name, a name I'd found on an old census record while tracing a family tree for a school project years ago. Olin. A name with no connection to the people who had given me life, only to decide it was forfeit. I became Ava Olin. Years passed. They were quiet, focused, relentless years. I put myself through UMass Boston, working 2 jobs, living on ramen and sheer, unadulterated spite. Spite was a powerful fuel. I never forgot what they tried to do. The memory was a cold, hard stone in my gut, a constant reminder of what was at stake. It was there when I graduated with honors and took a low-level administrative job at a burgeoning healthcare tech startup called Veridian Health Solutions. It was there when I spent my nights learning to code, when I identified workflow inefficiencies that were costing the company millions and designed the solutions to fix them. It was there when I rose through the ranks with a speed that left my colleagues breathless, from admin to project manager, from manager to director of operations in 3 years. It was there when, at 24, armed with a formidable reputation and a chunk of stock options, I became a part owner in the company I had helped build from the ground up. And it was certainly there, a sudden, electric jolt, when a familiar name popped up in the executive candidate search for our newest open role. Vice President of Business Development, Liam Albright. I stared at the resume on my screen like it was a ghost. The clean, professional font, the list of mediocre accomplishments, the faint air of entitlement that clung to it like cheap cologne. He had no idea. He couldn't possibly know. In his world, in their world, I had simply vanished into the foster care system, a sad, broken girl who probably withered away, voiceless and forgotten. Maybe they even convinced themselves I had died, that their monstrous wish had been granted by a kinder, more convenient fate. But I hadn't died. I hadn't withered. I had been quietly, diligently, building the future they never believed I was capable of, the one they had tried to steal. And now, with the click of a mouse, I held his fate in my hand. I sent the invitation myself from my executive email address. Ava Olin, Chief Operating Officer. He accepted immediately. He wouldn't recognize the name, of course. Why would he? And he certainly didn't expect to walk into the executive boardroom on the 40th floor of the Prudential Tower and find me sitting at the head of a massive, polished mahogany table, the Boston skyline sprawling behind me like a kingdom I had conquered. His mouth dropped open, a comical, fish-like gape. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a pasty, mottled gray. He stammered, the single word a puff of air. You're alive. I let a slow, cool smile spread across my lips. Alive, I said, my voice even and clear. Healthy, thriving, and no longer a source of spare parts for your convenience. Liam's eyes darted around the room, from the gleaming marble floor to the floor-to-ceiling glass wall behind me, to the framed industry awards that lined the credenza. But his gaze kept snapping back to my face, to my calm expression, to the strength I wore like armor, a strength they had never believed I possessed. You're the COO. He said again, his voice cracking on the acronym as if the letters themselves were unbelievable. I leaned forward, lacing my fingers together on the table. Yes, of the company you're begging to join, the one you sent your resume to without bothering to do a simple background check on the executive team. A fatal lack of due diligence, Liam. He attempted a smile, a pathetic, twitching thing. Look, Ava, I was just following opportunities. I didn't know. You didn't know I'd survive. I asked, my voice soft but edged with steel. Or you didn't know I would become more than just a cautionary tale whispered in hospital hallways. Liam opened his mouth, then closed it. He had no words. He was a ship without a rudder, lost in a sea of his own making. I read your resume, I continued, tapping the pristine white paper with one manicured finger. Your grades from Princeton were average. Your experience at that little boutique firm is thin. But the entitlement. The entitlement is fully intact. You have that in spades. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. Listen, what Mom and Dad said back then, I wasn't a part of that. I didn't know. You didn't know. My voice rose, the carefully constructed calm beginning to fracture, letting the fire show through. They went to a hospital, Liam, my hospital, and they told a doctor to cut me open and take my remaining organ without my consent. They said, and I quote, "She's not as important as Liam." I heard them. I was awake. Do you have any idea what that does to a 17-year-old girl lying in a hospital bed, barely able to breathe on her own? He looked down at the table, unable to meet my eyes. Tell me, Liam, I pressed on, my voice dropping back to a cold, conversational tone. How does it feel to be sitting here in your best suit, interviewing for a job at a company partially owned by the girl you and your parents decided was disposable, the girl you left to rot? Please, he whispered, his voice thick with a desperation that was almost satisfying to hear. I need this job. Things haven't been easy. Dad's investments went south. The house, I stood up slowly and walked to the window, turning my back on him. The city shimmered below, a testament to ambition and resilience. My voice was as cold and clear as the glass I looked through. You can go home and tell Mom and Dad that I heard every single word they said that night. And you can tell them that I am now standing in a place they will never, ever be able to reach. Then I turned to face him, the light from the window framing me in a formidable silhouette. As for this job, I let the words hang in the air for a moment, savoring his suspense. I created a policy when I first took this position, a zero-tolerance policy. It protects our company from individuals with a documented history of unethical behavior, especially those who have betrayed their own families, who have treated human beings like commodities. So no, Liam. You don't get to wear a suit and a charming smile and walk into my company and pretend that nothing ever happened. His face flushed a deep, blotchy red. You're ruining my life. He spat, the veneer of politeness finally cracking. I tilted my head, a gesture of mock curiosity. Oh, you mean the way you all tried to ruin mine. By stealing my body, my freedom, and my future. He glared at me, his eyes filled with a familiar, petulant rage. You always did this. You always played the victim. I leaned in close across the table, my voice a venomous whisper meant only for him. No, Liam, I was the victim. Now I'm the resolution. Get out of my office. He stormed out, slamming the door behind him. I stood there for a long moment in the sudden, deafening quiet. A profound sense of peace washed over me, clean and absolute. Then I picked up my phone. I dialed HR. Blacklist the name Liam Albright. Permanently, I said. And please send a notification to our partner firms in the financial and tech sectors. A discretionary flag. Unsuitable candidate due to ethical concerns. No, you don't need the details, just do it. They wouldn't be hiring him either. I had not just closed a door, I had bricked up the entire hallway. That night, I went home to my modest apartment overlooking the Charles River. I didn't need a mansion. I had something far more valuable: peace. I sat on my small balcony, a cool breeze drifting in off the water, and read an email that had arrived that afternoon. It was from the board of Mass General Hospital. They were officially launching a new nationwide campaign to educate and protect minors from unethical parental pressure in medical situations, specifically regarding organ donation. They were naming the new set of guidelines after me. The AVA protocol. AVA, my name. The one I had chosen for myself the day I decided to live. A week later, a letter arrived. Standard white envelope, no return address, but I recognized the spidery, elegant cursive of my mother's handwriting instantly. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a desperate, rambling plea. They were in financial ruin. Liam couldn't find work anywhere in Boston. They were about to lose the house in Brookline, the one with the mantelpiece full of his trophies. They were appealing to me as their daughter for help. I took out a piece of my own stationery, the header embossed with my name, Ava Olin. I wrote back just one sentence. I was your daughter when I was unconscious in a hospital bed, and you chose your son. Live with your choice. I never heard from them again. Sometimes, late at night, when the city is quiet and the only sound is the gentle lapping of the river against the banks, I think about that moment. That terrified girl in the hospital bed, tubes in her arms, listening to her own parents barter her life away. I think about their cold, calculating whispers, and I smile, because they thought that was the end of my story. They had no idea it was only the beginning. Please subscribe to our channel, and tell us in comments from where are you watching this video.